Welcome to the village.
Harmony, peace, love, and respect.
Welcome to the village.
Community support is what you get.
Welcome to the village.
Hey village, welcome back. And if you're new, welcome to your marriage village. This is a place where we offer resources to foster healthy marriages. My name is Goumah Marie Conde. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. And today I have with me my colleague and friend, Beth Assis, who is going to be joining me as we talk about pastors' wives and mental health. So without wasting much time, you know what to do: like, comment, subscribe, but share the video so that others will be able to also learn and grow as we do in the village. Now, I'm going to let Beth introduce herself and tell us more about her, and then we'll go from there.
Thank you, Goumah. Thanks for having me. My name is Beth, and I am a licensed mental health counselor. I work with Goumah. She's one of my coworkers, and I have been in this field how many years now? I guess about 6 or 7 years. Yeah, I'm married to a pastor, and I live in South Florida, and I have 4 daughters.
Yeah, yes. So let's start right there, Beth. Tell us about how you met your husband. Let's start with the love story first.
Okay. So I grew up in North Carolina, and when I was a teenager, I went on a trip, my very first trip out of the country. I went to Brazil. And when I was there, we were with a group of teenagers, and we teamed up with some other teenagers in Brazil, and we were working together doing different projects, social projects and things like that. And that is actually when I first met my now husband. He was living there, and he was the son of the pastor whose church we had partnered with to do this kind of mission work. And so I was 15 years old at the time. I don't really remember meeting him. I remember him being there, but I don't really remember like our first time that we met. We were super young.
Right.
But after several years, I actually went back to Brazil a few times in that time. And when I graduated from high school, I was invited actually to live in Brazil for a year, and just take a year off before going to college and volunteer in a school that they had. And so I taught English in a Christian school in Brazil. And that's when we actually met. We had already kind of developed a friendship over the years, but that's when we started dating, and during that year. And then I came back home, went to college. He ended up going to seminary in Brazil to become a pastor. And so we dated long distance for several years. And it was back in the day of the first year of college. I had email, he didn't. So we wrote letters back and forth. The next year we both had email, but we did all those like crazy ones. Like, I don't know if you remember the one ICQ, which was like we would try to talk back and forth. It's supposed to be instant, and it's not really. It's like a super delay. So I remember like some funny stories of telling him something really funny that happened, and then he didn't laugh, and I was like, gosh, and then like 7 seconds later, we were already like onto another subject, and he starts laughing. And so we went through all that, like the communication evolution that took place kind of in the mid 90s. Very expensive phone calls, getting in trouble with my dad for staying on the phone too long with him and stuff like that. So yeah.
Oh, sweet. That is sweet. So when did you get married? What year did you get married?
We've been married for 21 years now. So we got married in July of 2000.
Very nice. Very beautiful story. So did you always dream of marrying a pastor? Did you know you would marry a pastor?
No. And and it's so funny because I have friends that have said, I've always dreamed of marrying a pastor, and I'm like, yeah, no, that was not my, I don't think that I had like a specific, I don't think I ever thought through like, what would my husband do as a job? I don't think that thought ever crossed my mind growing up. And we started dating pretty young. So I think I didn't even get a chance to kind of be in that early adulthood stage of being like, I wonder what my husband will do for a living and things like that. So yeah, no.
Nice.
But we did have a little, hiccup in our relationship when he was actually planning to go to college in the United States. And then when he felt called to seminary, he stayed in Brazil. So that made it really tough because we had to do the long distance thing, even though we probably would have been in different universities in the United States and there would have been some distance, but at least we would have been close enough to like drive or take a quick plane ride or something. So yeah.
Oh, well, you all made it work, so you're here today. That's beautiful. Yeah, nice. All right, well, so let's transition into the field of counseling. What made you decide to go into counseling? Because you said you were a teacher before, you taught English. So what made you go into the field of counseling and mental health in particular?
Yeah, and it's funny because that's another moment in my life that I can't pinpoint the exact moment that I had this realization, but I went to college. I majored in elementary education, and when I finished school, I was actually finishing up school, and I was offered a job at a church doing some part-time youth ministry work. And so I started doing that, meeting with girls, discipling them, reading the Bible, teaching the Bible, doing small groups with teenagers. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And so when I graduated from college, I was offered a teaching job and I was offered a job at this church full-time, a church that I grew up at in North Carolina. And so I actually took the job at the church and I started working in youth ministry. So I did that for like maybe 5 years. And I just loved it. I love just spending time with people. I love spending time with young girls one-on-one, discipling them, kind of walking alongside them and their struggles and their difficult, this is the hard time of life, being a teenager.
Yes.
And so I did that for a while. And while I was doing that, that's kind of when I had the realization that I would like to go into, some kind of field within psychology. And so I looked into some seminaries and decided to do Christian counseling. And I started back in my early 20s. And after we got married in 2000, we'd been in Charlotte for a few years. And then we decided to go to Brazil and plant a church in Brazil. So I started the classes, but then I stopped. And we went to Brazil. That's when I taught English there in Brazil at a school, at an American school. And then when we came back to the US and we ended up in Miami, then I started looking into getting back into it because it was something that was still just something that I really desired to do. So I slowly had 2 little kids. And so I very slowly took a few classes at a time and just kind of knocked it out over the years and was able to complete my degree and get into it. But I don't have like this specific moment where I was like, oh, I want to do this, but it's just over time, I think, in the different opportunities that God has presented in my life, I was able to kind of see that was what I wanted to do.
Nice. I can relate to very slowly, tackling that degree. So we know whether going back to school as a parent is never easy. So kudos to you for doing that. Well, now you talked about enjoying working with girls, and what other population did you work with, or do you feel called to at this time?
I do now. I think I'm in a different phase of life because I have teenagers of my own. So sometimes it's a little harder to work with teens because it sometimes hits so close to home, and so I kind of have maybe even though I enjoy working with teenagers, and I really enjoy working with teenagers in a church setting, like in a small group, a Bible study type setting. With therapy, I love working with young adults, really. I probably mostly see women of all ages. That's probably my primary um, population, but just really all ages, all
Yeah.
ages.
Yeah.
And some couples.
Mm-hmm.
But I enjoy, working with women, especially who are struggling with self-esteem, self-worth issues, because I feel like I've had a lot of experience with working with that. And I also think that there's a spiritual component that we can work through, which can be that is very powerful.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about that spiritual piece.
Yeah.
Tell us about that spiritual piece as relates to women who are struggling, especially in the church, right? It's a good transition because the question that I have is, how do you even begin to address mental health issue in a church setting when we know that prayer is the key to heaven and faith unlocks the door, right? So how do you then talk about psychology and science and all of that as a pastor's wife dealing with women and women's issues?
Yeah. And I think, in my opinion and my perception, I think the science and the study of psychology really lines up with what we believe to be true as Christians. So an example of that would be, I think even in the last maybe 5 or 10 years, there's been that huge focus on gratitude and how we need to have these exercises of gratitude. And everywhere you go, you see a gratitude journal, and you can, hear some things that you need to be thankful for. And now that they've done research on, they've done actual brain scans, and they've done experiments really to see, here's the brain of someone before implementing a gratitude regimen, so to speak. So like, but 3 grateful things per day, write down 3 things you're grateful for. Not a big deal, like easy to do. You can do that in less than a minute. And they looked at the brains before and after, and they saw less cortisol in the brains. This was like maybe a 4 to 6 week span of time. So now we're seeing the effects, and all this is biblical knowledge. All this is stuff that's in the Bible, to be thankful, to be grateful, to thank God for things, to focus on what's good and what's noble and what's true, all those things. And I think now people are like, wow, look what it does to the brain. And, it's kind of been an age old thing for us, I think, as believers, that's important. So, I mean, of course, there's always going to be some ideas out there that don't really line up with things that I believe to be true. But I think for the most part, the study of psychology, the way that stress is reduced, and the way that we can care for ourselves, like the whole love your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah.
We sometimes as Christians forget the as yourself part. I don't know, we've like dropped that off. It's just like love your neighbor first, or love everyone else first, take care of everyone else first. And we put ourselves aside, especially I think women do that a lot, especially mothers. So
yeah. And speaking of cortisol, that lowering of cortisol, that's your stress hormones, right? So what the scan is showing is that when you're grateful or practicing gratitude, your stress hormone is lowered. Isn't that amazing? Yeah. I agree with you that I always say that to me, science just supports the scripture. That's just it. I feel like there's so much. Even today, we're talking about, speaking with someone, they were talking about helping someone overcome anger towards another person. And this person said, well, teach them how to like wish this person well. Like, I wish you blessing and I wish you all of these good things. And I'm thinking, if you go back to the Bible, that's what it says, right? You pray for your enemies, right? So it's the same thing. It's kind of, again, the science really supporting what the scripture tells us to do.
Yes, for sure.
I love that. So as a pastor's wife, have you always felt comfortable talking to parishioners about mental health issues?
Always, no. But, I think over the years, I think these days it's a lot easier to talk to people. I think people are open to talking about mental health issues. So I would say mostly these days, I don't run into any issues with people, but there's still people here and there that are like, yeah, I don't believe in therapy, or I don't, and of course, I think people tend to be careful when they're talking to me because they know that's my profession. So they might not even say, but yeah, the fact of the matter is, I think thankfully, the stigma surrounding mental health I feel like has diminished in the last, I don't know. I think it's slowly getting better. I don't think it's like where we need to be yet, but it's slowly getting better. So I do think that most people I interact with, they see the value of good therapy. They see the value of self-care. They might not do it, but they see the value.
Yeah.
They see the value of it.
Exactly.
But yeah, there's definitely been times, and I've lived in different places. So depending on the culture of the place, I lived in the South. I lived in Brazil, and there's different depending on who you're in contact with and what you're who you're around. It really depends. Because I think there's all of the above.
So in each of those contexts, where would you say you struggled the most with having this conversation around mental health?
I think that it's almost been like, and it could be a progression in my own life of being comfortable with talking about it. So I feel like it's just gotten more and more comfortable over the years. I don't know that that's necessarily place related, or if it might be more like me, feeling comfortable about it now that you just ask it like that. But yeah, so I think I definitely see a lot more people today where I live now, talking about, and I went to therapy, and I'm doing couples therapy with my spouse, or and just openly talking about it more than I ever saw when I lived in Brazil, or even when I lived up in North Carolina. But I also think it's a time, time has moved on in all of the places. So I think in all places, there's going to be more of that happening. And in my own life, just being open to talk about it. And I think that makes a difference in the lives of other people that you're interacting with, when you're talking about it and talking about the importance of, taking care of your mental health. I think it's huge. So.
Yeah. I love the fact that you are able to identify that even for you, it has been unnatural and maybe even slow progression, right? That you've had to evolve, and you're probably still evolving as relates to how comfortable you are with this issue. Because I think if you can identify that, then it helps to normalize what your parishioners are dealing with, right? There's slow progression. They're gradually cracking through the shell to even come forth and say, I have a problem.
Yeah. I also think it depends on the culture of the church, if we're talking about churches, because I think there's some churches where people want to show that they have it all together. Yes. And then there's some churches that talk a lot about, like, we don't have it all together. And so I think when you hear even the message from the front, from the sermon or from the worship leaders, like, we don't have it all together, that's why we need Jesus. Then there's more of a likelihood of people being open and saying, yeah, okay, I don't have it all together. But when people are wearing masks from the front, then, and leadership and things like that, I think the parishioners can also feel like, oh, okay, I have to also, when I'm at church, I have to wear a mask. I still think people do it anyways. We wear masks all the time, try to impress other people, or we don't want to tell people the really hard stuff that's going on, or we don't want everyone to know, or certain, you know what I mean? And so I think that's kind of part of church life. But I think the more that we're open and can be honest about our own, imperfections, and really it's really just a need for Jesus, in our lives, that we can say, okay, it's okay, if people think I'm strange if I share this, or if people judge me, but at the end of the day, there's more people being helped if I'm honest and transparent than if and I say that carefully, because I'm not always honest and transparent with my
Right, right.
I'm still afraid of admitting time honest and transparent with people. So
Yeah. No, but I do understand what you're saying, because I think about even in my own life, even me being in ministry. Um, can I say that I've talked about everything on the pulpit every time I've had to preach? No. But I also agree with you in the sense that the message that comes from the pulpit is important. Because if I stand there and I say I have this challenge, or I've experienced this before in my past, then it creates a room for others to also feel comfortable sharing, right?
yep.
So there is a big burden on leadership to really lead by examples in terms of vulnerability.
Right.
So let's talk about vulnerability in the church. How do we create a space where parishioners can be more vulnerable, or church members can be more vulnerable?
Yeah. Yeah, I think vulnerability breeds vulnerability. So I have a friend who says that all the time. So I think that if we are vulnerable, and again, that doesn't mean, because I think there are some people that come and they just say everything to everybody. And I don't think that I'm not sure that that's a healthy approach either. I think that that might be like a lack of boundaries and knowing who's
Yeah.
safe and who's not.
Yeah.
I do think we have to be careful, because I think there's also a lot of hurt that happens in the church because of things shared and then people either talking about it or judging or whatever it is. But I think that, you know, one of the most powerful things about being in a group of people, when someone shares something that they're struggling with. So, for example, if you're in a group of couples, and actually we have an example of this that happened in our church once, and this was years ago. But we had a little group that was meeting, and there were maybe like 5 couples. And everyone was pretty like superficial. Like we would go around and share, yeah, and like, yeah, we sometimes argue, or and it was very superficial. And then one day we went around and we were talking about something, and one person in the group was like, I think she had just had it with her marriage, and her husband was there sitting next to her, and she just like let it loose and was like, and he blah blah blah, and I can't even remember, honestly. I don't even remember what she said at this point, but she just like was super honest, and she was in a safe place. We had been meeting for a while. She was among friends, she was among safe people, and she just was like, this is not working, and he's doing this, and and she went on and on and on, and everyone was kind of like like, whoa, and but after that, that was like the turning point of the group. After that, people started being vulnerable and transparent, because it just took one person to be like, okay, let's be honest here. It's not easy. Marriage is not easy. Parenting is not easy. And I'm struggling in this way and this way. And then everyone else was like, oh yeah, me too. So I think, vulnerability, it breeds vulnerability. Yes. Someone has to start the ball rolling, someone has to be brave and be vulnerable within a safe group of people.
I agree. And that is the value of group, right? That is it. And that's part of the reason why we have this village, really to make, to normalize these kinds of issues that we deal with in the church, in our families, just to say we all struggle, and we can find solutions if we find the courage to be open and to ask, and to reach out. Yeah, so I couldn't agree with you more. Vulnerability breeds, I like that. Vulnerability breeds vulnerability. Yeah, I love it. All right, so what was the first time, and you don't have to go into details if you don't feel comfortable, but what was the first time you had to help someone or support, I prefer that word, support someone in your church with a mental health issue or say a crisis? And what I really want you to answer is what that felt like for you, having to do that.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of the first time. I don't know if I'm going to be able to identify a first time. Okay, I'm just trying to think of times in general. But I think what's happened and how it's been for me. Yeah, that's a great question. I think I've also had to be extremely careful with boundaries in this area because I actually did this to my friend the other day and I was like, I really shouldn't have done that. I have a friend who's a dermatologist and she's at our church. And so I said, oh, my daughter has a, can you look? And I'm more like walking into the church. I'm like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. I felt bad. I told her later. I was like, sorry. But people do that with me too. They're like, oh, hey, I have this like family member that, blah, blah, blah. And it's actually it takes way longer than the dermatologist looking at a little rash. You know what I mean?
That's right.
And so I've, again, I can't identify like the first time, but I definitely have had moments where it's starting to drain me a little bit. Do you know what I mean? And so when I start to feel that, I will immediately kind of say, okay, but here's the number to where you can call and get a good therapist. And I've had people also like want me to almost, like hand select their therapist. Like, who do you, and I don't think it's like a bad thing. It's just, they're saying, who do you recommend? And I'm like, but we, now I don't recommend anyone anymore. I'm like, no, just call the office and they are really, they're equipped to figure out the best person for you, because it's also a timing thing. It's also, there's a lot of different moving parts that you have to work through when you start working with a therapist. So I think I had to kind of scale back and say, just keep it brief, if you know what I mean. Like, okay, I can talk about it. And I even give myself, even if I don't say to the person, I even give myself like a time limit. Like, I'm not going to be on this phone call for more than 10 minutes. I'm not going to go on and on. Because unfortunately, like, a lot of people are struggling. Many times it's not necessarily the person, it's like a family member, and they're really worried and they want to know what they can do and how can I help. And really the conversation could go on and on and on, and so I have just had to really pay attention to my own limits as far as what I can do to help. And then point them in the direction to get, because usually it's somebody that really needs continued therapy. And I'm not, especially if it's like somebody from church, I'm not the best fit, because I'm also, that dual relationship thing where I'm at the church and they're also my client. That makes it tricky. So I try to point them in another direction and have them, see somebody else. But yeah, it can feel draining, I think.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. I can see that. So what I'm hearing is you wouldn't be the go-to person at church anyway for that kind of situation. It would have you would really be kind of outsourcing or redirecting the person to get help somewhere else.
Yeah. So I think we don't really have, I mean, I'm not sure that we have something in place for someone to, I think when people go and speak to the pastor will do the same thing. It's like pastoral counseling. When they realize, okay, I'm at my limit, like I don't think I can help this person more than this, then they refer out to professional counseling. And so I try to do the same thing. I mean, it's just the same thing as the dermatologist example. It's like, oh, I know, that's easy. I have her cell phone number. I'm just going to text her right now. You know what I mean? And people do that with me. And I don't mind, actually don't mind that people do that. I find it like, it's nice. I think it's nice that people feel comfortable to do that. I think I just have to be careful, especially during the pandemic. It was getting to a point that it was like, a regular basis. And then that starts to feel a little too much. You know what I mean?
Yes, I do.
But I like that people do. I mean, I feel, I'm glad, I'm happy that people feel comfortable to reach out to me. I don't want it to sound like I don't like it. But I do also know my limits, because I'm also, I have my own, I have my own kids, I have my marriage, I have a job, I have all these other things I'm juggling. So I have to be very careful with my time.
Exactly. Do you feel like people have sufficient access to, even if you're just looking in your own church setting, do you feel like people have sufficient access to mental health care, especially within the church?
Yes, I think that within our church, yes. I think it depends. Honestly, I think unfortunately, and honestly, I think it's a financial thing for a lot of people. And so, you know, even people who have like plenty of money sometimes don't want to spend the money on therapy because it's expensive and it's like another cost and it's just one more thing. But you know, I'm imagining there's a lot of, you know, low income areas where there's churches that people really don't, and I think that represents maybe like a handful of people in our churches, but like it's also very, you know, in our city we see it all over. But there's people that just really can't afford it. So then I also try to always mention, financial aid. There's financial aid. There are ways that you can get the care that you need. You might have to do a few extra steps, but there's a way to do it. But yeah, I think it's hard if somebody's really struggling with something and then they have to go through a lot of things to even be able to get help. Like they have to put in a lot of effort. That makes it hard, you know. I think that's I don't know, that's hard.
It does. No, it's true. All right, so let's transition into pastors' wives and the kind of mental health and support that they receive or not. What is the common, and you probably have friends who are also ministers' wives, and so you probably would, probably talk about this sometimes. But what do you find to be the common mental health challenge that pastors' wives have?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I want to apologize for my nose sniffling.
It's okay.
During this whole thing.
This is the cold season, people.
I'm at the end of this cold that doesn't want to leave my body. It's driving me crazy.
I know.
So if I pull out the tissues here and there.
I
think for women, pastors' wives, hands down, it's loneliness, isolation, feeling lonely and isolated. So then, we're again looking at like the self-esteem, self-worth type issues with those clients.
Yeah. And
churches can be harsh. Churches can be a harsh environment for pastors' families, like in a fishbowl, people looking at them and watching every move. I feel very thankful that I would say the church that we started here in Miami, it does not feel like that to me. I don't feel that pressure. Thankfully, many of my close friends are actually within the church. Even though, every advice I ever got like from people is like, be friends with people outside of the church. And I do have friends outside of the church too, but I would say like some of my closest friends are actually, church members of our church. So,
and you can say the name of your church. You feel free to say the name of your church if you want to. I mean,
okay.
Yes.
I'm like being careful not saying anything.
No, absolutely. Feel free. Yes, absolutely.
So we started a church. It's called Crossbridge Church, and it's been in Miami for 13 years. We just had our 13th anniversary, so we have a few different locations. But I think also because we started the church, there was a bit of the culture of the church was established there, and so I think part of it was like, we don't want to be in a fishbowl, and so we're not gonna that's like not acceptable. But I know it still happens. People look at the leadership of the church, and I'm not like oblivious to that happening, but I think I don't feel it like some stories I've heard of people just getting just real, harsh criticism,
So loneliness is the major challenge that church pastors' wives will have. And we know in the trauma world that loneliness is really traumatizing, right? So you think about what these women are having to deal with, loving God, loving their husbands, most times loving the church, right? But yet feeling as if maybe they don't even belong there. So then you talk about self-esteem. I'm wondering how that also triggers anxiety. Do you find anxiety to be high in the church as well?
So I think when you think of another component that I didn't mention with like pastors' wives, which is a tendency, that can happen very easily is that a pastor's wife might get pushed into something that is not really her passion, such as run the children's ministry or run the women's ministry or lead the choir. I mean, like just things like that they're like, okay, I'm gonna do it because that's like I'm supposed to do it. You know, I need to do this because I'm supposed to do it. And so then they're working in areas that are not they're not passionate about, and that's even more like isolating and feels lonely. So yeah, I think it causes anxiety. I think feeling like people have this expectation of you and you having to live up to that expectation causes a lot of anxiety, and so and I think that's a big issue among pastors' wives for sure.
Yeah. How can and then there's also this piece where the church has expectation, or maybe expectations, probably many, but what about what this spouse, the husband, what are his expectations too? And do those also affect the wife?
Yeah. And so I think a couple that's going into ministry needs to have some like really honest, candid conversations with each other about expectations, because I think times have changed, thankfully, where it's not the typical the man is the pastor and he tells the wife like exactly what she's going to go to and what she's going to do. But I think that there are still places, and I've heard lots of stories where that kind of still tends to happen. But I think just having an honest conversation, of what are your passions, where do you feel led, what do you want to be involved in, and there's some pastors' wives, if we're talking about pastors' wives in particular, there's some that are very highly involved in the church and they love it. Yeah. They love to do that. And there's some that are very highly involved in the church and they don't love it. And then there's some that kind of are standoffish and they don't like that they're they want to be more involved. I think there's all types. And so, but just having an honest conversation about like, what are the expectations? What are the, if we're going to be hired, let's say at this church, what are their expectations for me as your spouse? How much am I required? Maybe it's like kind of an unwritten expectation, but we need to talk through this stuff,
I think that's great.
Communication is key.
Yeah.
Expectations.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, really talking about it, maybe even almost doing, when I'm saying counseling, I'm not saying it has to be with a therapist. You can also counsel with other pastors, right? But maybe even counseling about what this looks like in the long term.
Yeah. There's a lot of great organizations now that are doing like church planting prep. So even I forgot, there's one, I think it's up near where you live. I forgot the name of it, but they do like a church planting assessment, and they do a very extensive interview of the church planter and their spouse, and they talk through like everything, and it is almost like a counseling session, and they fill out a very lengthy questionnaire, and they have to send the questionnaire to some friends and family to fill out. Yeah. So I filled them out for friends of mine and things like that. And it's we didn't go through that process. I don't think they had it when we started back when we did, but very helpful to everyone that I know. Yeah. And sometimes they say like, hey, I don't think you're ready for this.
Correct.
This is not, so anything like that. I think when we try to do things solo, when we try to just like go our own way and not talk to anyone, not to consult with anyone about it, not talk to other believers who know us well, who can say, yeah, I don't know if this is going to be, have you considered this? Have you thought about this? When we do that, that's when we tend to get ourselves in trouble. I think when we consult with people who are wiser than we are, who maybe have had some experience in the area, The hard thing is that people who are kind of in it now and they feel that they need to make a change and they're like, what do I do?
Well, that
You
was
know?
going to be my next question, because yes, I think that is so resourceful, and maybe we can even add that information on in our notes when we, when we share this video. But yeah, then what about the ones who have already started the journey and now they're realizing? So I went to a retreat, my husband and I went to a retreat years ago, and there was a couple there, the pastor and his wife. And at the end of the retreat, because this particular retreat is called United Marriage Encounter, I'm not sure if others know about it, but I think it's a very powerful retreat for couples. So when you get there, you're not allowed to talk to other couples. It's just you and your spouse the entire weekend until you're leaving. So you really are forced to face each other. And I remember what this wife said was that she was actually going to file divorce the next week, and her husband had no clue. And the pastor was shocked when he found out during this time that the wife was going to file for divorce, and they had been married for over 30 years. But he had been pastoring, and the church was his spouse. And she was very lonely, like you talked about. And so she didn't know what to do with herself. And she thought, you know what, maybe I just don't belong in this marriage. So it seems like what we're saying is maybe that kind of thing is what those people would need. What else would you recommend other than a retreat for couples where this pastor was able to have a breakthrough for his marriage? What would you recommend that couples do?
There's a great book that I always recommend to clients and just to everyone, to people. It's called Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. And I actually just got the book Emotionally Healthy Woman, and it's great. And I started by listening to like a podcast of her name is Jerry Scazzaro, and she has like a podcast kind of describing each of the chapters of the book. And it, now I'm like listening to the audiobook when I'm in the car.
Yes. And who's the author?
Time in the traffic.
Who's the author of the first one? So healthy.
Okay, so it's Peter Scazzaro is and so they're basically their story is they've been married for I don't know how long. They have adult children. I think they have grandkids and everything now. But they went to plant a church in New York City, and it was just very hard. Everything was very hard, and he would overwork at work, and she would overwork at home, and they had 4 kids, and so it was very. They got to a point where it was like, this is not, she's got some great stories in there. And one is which she like quit going to church. She quit going to his church. She started going to another church.
Okay.
And I think that was like the turning point where they had to like, okay, this is not working,
Yeah.
And they got some really good help, good counseling, and they kind of implemented some things into their marriage and their time and stuff like that. But yeah, I think those are great resources because they have a lot of resources on their website. They have workbooks, they have things you can do with small groups of people. And really, like anytime I pick up their literature, it's like helpful to me because it's just a reminder of having good boundaries. It's a reminder of, if you've got stuff from your past that you haven't dealt with, it's going to affect you still today. You know that it does. And we know it's like, oh, there's like still affecting me. Right. But we are like, yeah, I don't want to work. I don't want to worry about that right now. And so even in the original book, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, there's a great chapter on the past and breaking free from the past and how important it is to work through some of that past hurt, past trauma, that we all have it, we all have experienced. And so some in different levels, some is worse, some is harder stuff, but everyone has experienced some sort of trauma in their past. And so working through that is super helpful. And then just learning boundaries and like, what are you like self-care, what do you love to do? She has an exercise that she says, like, write down 10 things that bring you joy, that bring you life. Because a lot of women, especially, I mean, I'm a woman, I can't speak for men, but women, I know, and myself and just people that I am, around, friends, family, we tend to just go, and there's a lot to do. And just taking that time for self-care is huge. So she talks a lot about that. So I think stuff like that, just kind of getting into either listening to the podcast or reading the books and doing some of the exercises can kind of be an eye opener. So those are good places for people to start. And with couples, hopefully both are doing it, you know, not just, but I think even if only one is willing to do it, you know, I think any positive change that we make in our lives, it does affect the rest of the family, even though we might get a lot of pushback at first, you know? So
That's right.
it's been
Well,
very convicting for me, like a lot of their material. It's been very helpful.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I love that. So hey, you've gotten a lot of resources here. So Pete Scazzero and the wife is
Jerry Scazzero.
Jerry Scazzero. There you go. So look them up and get the resources. And as we're wrapping up, Beth, I want to talk about, we talked about friendship a little bit. And you talked about how for you are so fortunate that you have a lot of your good friends are in church with you. Yeah. But how about the pastors' wives who don't have friends within the church? Because maybe they've taken that advice very seriously, that your friends should be outside, right? What do they do? How do they really find support in the church? And how can husbands support the wives? There's a two question.
Yeah, I think it is important to have, you know, friendships outside the church as well. I think having friends that you can, like the couple can both connect well with the other. That's hard. That's one thing when I got married, I didn't realize that's really hard. Sometimes I remember when we first got married, like some of my really good friends, my husband didn't connect as well with their spouses. And then some of his really good friends, I didn't connect as well with their, you know, and I'm like, where can we find like the both? And, you know, and it's still, even to this day, it's tricky, you know, but we've been blessed with some really good friends. And I think people sometimes wait too long, like, not that they wait too long. I don't think you can ever wait too long, but I think when you're, you know, spiraling into depression, when you're super anxious, when you know, everything seems to be going wrong, that's a hard time to start to like develop these friendships, you know? And so I think for people listening who are not in a place where they're spiraling out of control, to, you know, invest in those relationships now, because, you know, not for selfish reasons, but, you know, at some point, those are the friends that might help you walk through something really difficult. But if you're already in the midst of something really difficult, it's going to be a lot harder for you to, you know, reach out to those people. So I think for anyone who's like, that should be on the top of one of the top priorities, I think, in someone's life, you know, at least the top 3 or 4 of like really investing in solid friendships. And I think that's super important, because I think sometimes time goes by. Like, I know with me, you know, sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, I haven't hung out with this person, and this has been since the summer, you know, and time goes by fast because we're busy. But I think that, you know, friends make life, you know, a lot sweeter. And so I think that it's really important to invest in friends and friendships. And I think depending on your church, it could be in the church, could be outside the church, could be some of both. But I think if you say, you know, I'm too busy, we're too busy to do that, then you're too busy. You know, there's some stuff that maybe needs to be taken off the plate. Because I think, you know, people in leadership in churches really need to be taking care of themselves for longevity in the ministry. You know, if we're not taking care of ourselves, there's only so far that we're going to be able to last, you know. So just be paying like close attention to that. I think friendships are huge.
Yeah, I think that advice is just pure gold. That, I mean, I've never heard someone or pastor's wife put it that way, but cultivating the friendships way before. You know, because most times I think that's what happens. People wait until they're in crisis, and now they want the women of the church to support them. But these women feel disconnected from you, so they don't really know how to begin. So I think that's really, really wise to say, you know, you can find someone out of 100 or 50 or 2,000 women, right? Depending on the size of your church. You know, you can find someone there to befriend. Yeah.
I feel like, I don't know about you, but I feel like when I'm seeing clients, the ones who are struggling the most are the ones when I ask, like, tell me a little bit about your support system, friendships. When they answer that, they'll say, I don't really have many friends, or I don't have any friends, or I had this one friend, but then she moved away, And so it's very clear to me who has a good support system from the beginning, like from the first session on.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, then there's going to be people, I guess, listening that are in the midst of something really hard and they haven't cultivated. And, I think still like reaching out for people, investing in those relationships as much as you can in the situation. It's like, it's like a couple. If you're uh not investing in the marriage, and then all of a sudden you hit like a big bump in the road, that bump in the road is going to be a lot harder to deal with.
Right.
And maybe the bump in the road has nothing to do with you and your spouse. It's maybe with your child, or with something else, like a job, loss of a job, or an illness, or whatever. It's going to be a lot harder to go through that together if you haven't invested in the relationship. And so I'm sure there's people that are in the midst of something really hard, and they haven't invested. And it's just a reminder, to that we need people, we need each other. Like, that's why we were created, to be in community with other people. I think that's why church is so important. I think through the pandemic, a lot of people stopped going to in-person services, which I think was very wise at first, and then now that things are kind of back open and it's a lot safer, and we know a lot more about the virus, and we know how to protect ourselves. There are many people that have gone back to church. There's many people that are like, and so, I think everyone has their reasons, and obviously I don't want to judge anyone's reasons for not going back, but I think that community is so important, and we need it, and so whatever that looks like, maybe it's not like going to a church service, but going to at least being with a group, like a community group of some sort, a church group where you can feel open and vulnerable, and have other people be open and vulnerable with you.
I agree. And that's what, and I was going to say, to add on to that, even if you don't have that circle right now within your family system, like Beth was saying, excuse me, like Beth was saying, but you are in crisis and you feel like you really need people, but you don't have them within your family or close by. That's why most agencies that help with mental health, they have support groups. So sometimes those people in the support group, they become like family to you. If you join it and you already connect. So reach out, just do your best to reach out. I think that's what you're saying to them, that whatever, it's never late, reach out anyway.
And there are some great support groups. I'm glad you said that. There's a lot of great support groups, and there is power in being in a group and hearing that you're not the only one, and other people are going through maybe something similar. So if you're like in a grief group, for example, someone else is going through something similar, you're not the only one. Sometimes we compare ourselves with other people based on like social media, which we know like logically is not accurate, an accurate portrayal of the person, but it still seems pretty accurate.
Right.
we're scrolling through.
That's fun.
So, I think, that's another wonderful way to get connected to people, is to be in a support group.
Yeah, I love that. All right, so let's end with how husbands can support their wives, especially when it comes to mental health within the church. How can they, and it doesn't mean that the wife is having a mental health crisis, just to support her so that she maintains that wellness, right? Overall, how can husbands be a support to their wives?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think by first, like, communicating and talking and asking questions, not being afraid to ask hard questions. So, how are you feeling, and how does that make you feel? Things like that. How are you dealing with XYZ, and how are you feeling in your job these days? How's it going for you? Are you enjoy, what are you give like some open-ended questions, I think is really helpful, because I think especially like mothers who are either stay-at-home moms, or maybe they're working and raising kids. How do you feel supported? Do you feel, and I think in many ways you can notice, like when someone is tired in your house. In my house, we can notice when someone's tired.
Right.
But like just being willing to, okay, what are some things, what can help? What can I do to help? If you're feeling overwhelmed, how can I help you? Is there anything that I can help you do today that would help you feel like you can check off the boxes on the list, the to-do list, or whatever it is? And I think it depends on the person, but just I think regular check-ins. I think it was you that sent me this like list of the different forms of intimacy, which I've shared with lots of people, and I love that, because we sometimes focus on, when we hear the word intimacy, I think we go immediately to like sexual intimacy. But there's all that, that thing that you sent me, it's like maybe 25 different types of intimacy. And I think we can develop intimacy. I think probably the number one complaint of women is like the emotional intimacy. They feel a lack of emotional intimacy. So that's, I think that can be improved by sharing your feelings more with your spouse, even though it might be hard to do. But saying, I had a hard day at work, it made me feel frustrated or made me feel sad. Even just using those words, those feelings words, I think does wonders. And then secondly, asking the questions like about how do you feel? How are you feeling with this and that? But developing those different forms of intimacy, I think one on there is like nature intimacy or something like that, where like you're going and you're just like watching a sunset together, or you're taking a hike in the mountains, or and you're just enjoying nature together. Because I think we put a lot of pressure on one or two types of intimacy, and there's lots of different ways we can develop intimacy.
That's right. That's very true. It's very true. Yes, and now that you brought up that, I will share that at some point, Phyllis, for you all, because it is very helpful. But yeah, I do love it. And yes, and we're not saying, because I get this a lot from pastors who I may work with. They will say, well, but sexual intimacy is also important. Yes, it is. We're not saying it's not. And that really will require a whole sit-down conversation, because there's a whole lot to that. That I'm sure pastors will actually also benefit from. So maybe another day we'll do a whole different topic or series on that one. I'm just warning you, because I know you're going to come at me with this.
And I totally agree. I think sexual intimacy is like super important. Right. Exactly. I think that they, all of the others are also ways of, I think when you improve in other ways of being intimate, then it benefits the sexual intimacy.
Correct. I love it. Yep. So it boils down to that, right? It's the result of all the other intimacy. I love that. All right. So tell me, Beth, something that I may not have asked today that you feel like it's really important for the village to know in terms of how they can support pastors' wives.
I think that's a great question. I think maybe just with expectations would be one thing, not putting the pastor's family on a pedestal in any way. I think with me, it's not that I don't care. I do care, but I think I can kind of be like, okay, but it's more like my kids. When I think about my kids, if people are having expectations of my kids, I get a little more like, so I think just showing love and kindness to everyone, but I think particularly my kids, when I see people, I'm just trying to think of ways that I feel encouraged. When I see people encouraging my kids, I'm like, that's great. They can say whatever they want about me, but you know what I mean? Like if I see people encouraging my kids, that's cool. So that's probably not putting pastors' families on the pedestal, and also being encouraging towards all of us, but particularly the kids. 'Cause
Yeah, I love
I
that.
think it's rough on the kids.
Yeah.
My husband was a pastor's kid, so he knows like what it was
Mhm.
like to grow up in a pastor's family, and with the spotlight on. And my kids, I think, feel that it's a different it's a different world these days, so it's different for them, but they still, they have that as well. And
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
yeah, I just think any kind of encouragement towards them it goes a long way. It's huge.
Yeah,
So,
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. Well, and let me just say, by the way, before I wrap up with Beth, that there was no memo sent out, but I see we're both in green, which I love. Yeah. So if you're watching and thinking, oh, look, they have no, we didn't even, it wasn't planned, but I love it. All right.
I know, I did know that too.
Well, Beth, tell the village members where they can find you. What do you do on social media? Talk about your church. Anything that you think is important for the village to know about you. This is the time.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I don't even think I mentioned where we work, Wellspring Counseling. I was trying to be careful. I was like, do I mention places?
No,
It's fine.
no, go
So
ahead.
yeah, Wellspring Counseling. I'm on social media, but I'm like, private kind of. If I don't know you, I'm not going to accept your friend
Yeah.
request. So I'm not like super, but
Yeah.
our church is Crossbridge Church, and there's
Mhm.
a lot of social media there.
Mhm.
But
Exactly.
yeah, so
Yeah.
that's me.
Yeah. So follow the church Crossbridge. I think that's really what I wanted you to get out. Follow Crossbridge and watch the services. Are they online?
Yeah, we have
Yeah,
services
online.
online. Yes, we have our online services every Sunday morning. It depends on the
Yeah.
campus, but yeah,
Mhm.
to 11 a.m., 10 a.m. 5
Awesome.
p.m.
Yep. So do that. So follow Crossbridge online. And again, Beth is at Wellspring Counseling Miami. She is a great therapist. And as you've heard, she enjoys working with women, self-esteem issues, confidence building, all that good stuff. And she works with couples too, sometimes. So if you go to Wellspring Miami, wellspringcounselingmiami.org, I believe. If you go there, it's a shame that I don't know my own email address, but I know it's well, it's
I think it's wellspringmiami.org, right? Yeah.
wellspringmiami.org. Go to
Yeah.
wellspringmiami.org, see, and you will find Beth on there, and then you can reach out if you need services.
And we have a great program there that I lead. It's called the Restore Retreats. I probably should have mentioned this.
Yes.
And it's basically an intensive retreat for this is a therapy retreat, and you do a lot of group work, psychoeducation, art therapy, things like that. So that's there on the website, and it's an amazing program that we do virtually as well as in person. So that's something that I enjoy and I love.
That's right. That's right. And she is the one who leads, or I should say, she is the program director for that, right? For Restore Retreat. So, and it is an excellent retreat. It's a trauma resolution retreat for adults. So if you need it, contact Wellspring. All right. Well, it's been really great having you with us, Beth. This has just been a very eye-opening, and I'm sure it'll be very helpful for members of the village and others who are watching anywhere that this video ends up. So, so it's been good today. We've been talking about pastors' wives and mental health within the church. And I've had with me Beth Assis, who's a licensed marriage and family. She's mental health. She's a licensed mental health therapist. She was with Wellspring Counseling Miami. And she is just really passionate about women and couples. If you're new to the village, again, it was nice having you here. Like, subscribe, comment, share the video with others so that together we can all grow healthy marriages. Share with your pastors, share with your pastor's wives. Let the video go out so that others can get the help. So, as we do in true village sense, let us pray. May God bless you. And may God bless your marriage. May God keep your marriage safe. And as a pastor's wife, I pray that God will cover you with courage and protection, and that you will have the strength to be able to endure whatever life throws at you. And I pray that you will find comfort in good friendships that will keep you healthy and keep you strong and keep the church surviving. May all that you put your hands to prosper. May your marriage always be blessed. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.